The body cam video that took YouTube by storm has a crazy update. You remember Tayvin Galanakis, probably not related to Zach Galifianakis? You know, he was the football player at William Penn University who was pulled over in August of 2022 for having his high beams on and was subjected to several field sobriety tests. And when he mostly passed those tests and a breathalyzer test, he was still arrested for a DUI. Back at the station, a drug influence evaluation concluded Galanakis wasn't under the influence of anything, alcohol, marijuana, nothing, and he was let go. Tyler then sued the cops who arrested him and the city, and that's the lawsuit that we're taking a look at today, because in a shocking ruling, I mean one that I actually cannot believe, the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, yes, that 8th Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that the cops did not have qualified immunity. Hey, I'm America's attorney. I've been a lawyer for over 20 years, helping over 160,000 people, and I've argued a bunch of cases in front of the 8th Circuit, and this ruling blows my mind. So let's break it down. As I said, following his release, Tayvin Galanakis filed a lawsuit against the officers and the city of Newton, asserting that his arrest had been unlawful. He brought multiple claims in state court, including a federal civil rights claim under 42 U.S.C. 1983 for violating his Fourth Amendment right to be free from arrest without probable cause. He also alleged false arrests under Iowa state law and claimed violations of the Iowa Constitution. Galanakis' lawsuit against the city of Fig Newton asserted that it was vicariously liable under a respondeat superior theory for the officer's misconduct. He also brought claims under Monell versus Department of Social Services, alleging that the city and its police chief failed to adequately supervise or train the officers. The defendants responded by removing the case to federal court and filing a motion for summary judgment. Classic defense moves. Officers argued that they were entitled to qualified immunity on a federal claim, which would shield them from liability if their actions didn't violate a clearly established constitutional right. They also asserted state statutory immunity for the false arrest claim under Iowa law. The city of Fig Newton similarly sought to dismiss the claims against it, arguing that if the officers were immune, the city could not be held liable. Qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that protects government officials, including police officers, from being personally sued for actions they take while performing their official duties, so long as those actions do not violate clearly established constitutional rights. In the context of this case, the doctrine was central to the officers' argument. They argued that even if they made a mistake in arresting Tayvin Galanakis, they should not be held liable unless it was obvious, based on existing legal precedent, that their actions were unconstitutional. When a court evaluates a claim of qualified immunity, it asks two key questions. First, did the officer's conduct violate a constitutional right? And second, was the right clearly established at the time of the incident? For a right to be clearly established, it must be so well defined that any reasonable officer in the same situation would have known they were breaking the law. This means that general statements of the law aren't enough. There usually needs to be prior court decisions with similar facts to guide officers' behavior. In practice, qualified immunity often makes it difficult for plaintiffs to succeed in lawsuits against police officers, especially when no previous case has addressed a nearly identical situation. You guys probably already know this, but qualified immunity comes from England, where the king made the laws and the king was immune from being sued. It's a pretty un-American idea, and the result of the doctrine is that oftentimes, almost every time, these cases fail. Defendants frequently raise the defense at the summary judgment stage, hoping to avoid a full trial, and it usually works. In Galanakis' case, the officers argued that even if they were wrong, they at least had arguable probable cause to arrest him, which would entitle them to qualified immunity. The courts had to decide whether that argument held up under real legal scrutiny. And decide they did. The district court denied summary judgment on the key claims. It found that there was sufficient evidence for a jury to conclude that the officers did not have probable cause to arrest Galanakis and thus were not entitled to qualified immunity. The court also allowed the state false arrest and vicarious liability claims against the city of Fig Newton to move forward. The officers and the city then appealed that decision to the 8th Circuit, setting the stage for a ruling with significant implications for both qualified immunity doctrine and state-level police accountability. In its 12-page analysis, the 8th Circuit focused on whether officers Winters and Wing had arguable probable cause to arrest Tayvin Galanakis for driving under the influence of marijuana. Arguable probable cause is a legal standard that asks whether a reasonable officer in the same situation could have mistakenly believed that there was a legal basis for the arrest. This standard is key in qualified immunity cases. Officers don't need to be right, but their mistakes must be reasonable under the circumstances. And if the court finds that no reasonable officer could have believed that there was probable cause, then qualified immunity does not apply. After reviewing the body cam footage, the Court of Appeals accepted the district court finding that Galanakis showed almost no signs of intoxication. Like me right now. He was not driving erratically, he did not have bloodshot or watery eyes, he did not smell of marijuana, and he did not slur his speech or act in a physically unstable manner. He complied with all field sobriety tests, and although he made minor errors like taking too many steps or not counting out loud, those mistakes were not enough to suggest impairment. Most importantly, he voluntarily took a breathalyzer, which showed a 0.0000 blood alcohol level, and he repeatedly denied having consumed alcohol or using marijuana that night. The officers pointed to several details they believe justified the arrest, such as Galanakis driving with high beams. Okay, I don't think that's why you pull people over. His air fresheners, his chewing gum, his momentary difficulty locating documents, and that one weird 8 to 10 second pause before answering when he was last high. He had to think about it. But the court rejected these as insufficient when viewed in context. Let me say that in a way that's not quite as fancy. After watching the viral video, the court agreed with all of the rest of us. The court emphasized that probable cause must be based on the totality of the circumstances, not cherry-picked behaviors that, by themselves, are not inherently suspicious. The court found that nothing Galanakis did rose to the level of suggesting a substantial chance that he was under the influence of drugs. In fact, the officers conceded that alcohol was ruled out as a cause, and there was no evidence that would have made marijuana impairment a reasonable conclusion. The Eighth Circuit concluded that Galanakis should have a right to convince a jury that the belief that he was intoxicated was not objectively reasonable and that his arrest violated a clearly established constitutional right. Because of that, the court affirmed the lower court's denial of qualified immunity, holding that the officers could be accountable for arresting someone without sufficient legal justification. This is a great day for regular people. And in addition to the federal claims, Tayvin Galanakis also brought several claims under Iowa state law, including false arrests and violations of the Iowa Constitution. The city of Fig Newton and the officers argued that they were protected from these claims under state statutory immunity. Under Iowa Code Section 670.4a, government employees are immune from liability if the right allegedly violated was not clearly established at the time of the incident, using a standard similar to federal qualified immunity. However, unlike federal law, Iowa's false arrest claims also involve a slightly different legal test that considers whether the officer acted in good faith and had a reasonable belief that a crime had been committed. On appeal, the Eighth Circuit declined to fully address the state law immunity claims. It explained that federal appellate courts can only review state law issues on interlocutory appeal if they are inextricably intertwined with the federal qualified immunity question. In this case, the court found that Iowa's legal standards for false arrest and immunity were not identical to the federal standards and could not be resolved solely by deciding the federal constitutional issue. As a result, the court ruled that it did not have jurisdiction to decide those state law claims at this stage. Instead, it dismissed that portion of the appeal, allowing those claims to continue forward in the lower court. This meant that while the court firmly rejected qualified immunity on the federal claims, the future of the state law claims would have to be decided separately in further proceedings, meaning that Galanakis can take those claims to trial and convince a jury that his state law rights were violated as well. The Eighth Circuit's decision in Galanakis versus City of Fig Newton sends a clear message about the limits of police authority and the proper application of qualified immunity. By affirming that the officers may have lacked arguable probable cause to arrest Tayvin Galanakis, the court reinforced a core principle of the Fourth Amendment. People cannot be arrested without objective, reasonable justification. For now. The fact that Galanakis passed a breathalyzer, showed no visible signs of impairment, and behaved in a calm and coherent manner throughout the stop meant that no reasonable officer could have believed that he was under the influence of drugs. The court's ruling emphasized that vague hunches or minimal irregularities, like chewing gum or brief hesitation in answering a question, these are not enough to justify an arrest. In America, for now. Following the ruling, Galanakis' claim will continue in the lower court, which means that he can have a trial if the case is not settled. But what a moment we are having on this issue, because this ruling happened at almost exactly the same time that President Trump issued an executive order which basically says that he wants to make sure that no police officer can ever be sued for anything, no matter how violent or wrong or stupid or criminal, and that the government should offer assistance to those officers and also give them more weapons and power. And if you haven't read the executive order, I suggest that you do. I'll put a link in the description. It sounds like Trump wants to create a police state in which we are all afraid of the cops. It seems unlikely that this Galanakis case will go to trial, as watching the video will likely convince the jury that the cops were just flexing their powers and not using real judgment. Serve and protect my. What are your thoughts on the officer's defense of qualified immunity? Do you agree with the Court of Appeals ruling? Drop your pro se opinion down below in the comments and let me know what you think. And don't forget to lawyer up with me, America's Attorney, by hitting that subscribe button, because if you don't, I'll administer a breathalyzer test to you and you'll be found guilty. And then I'll be back soon with more legal breakdowns, and you don't want to miss it. I'll see you then. Bye. And the city of Newton are asserting... It asks to create... Now who's drunk?